She had 3 seconds to make a choice that would either save a life or end her own. It wasn't a scream, and it wasn't a hero's tackle. It was a ballpoint pen and a receipt. When Elena dropped the check at the most dangerous table in the city, she didn't just ask for a signature. She circled 3 random words on the itemized list. Gunman. Wrong. Exit. She slid it across the mahogany table, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. The man in the suit looked down. He didn't blink. He didn't breathe. He just reached for his waistband. This is the story of how a waitress outsmarted a hit squad, saved a Mafia don, and found herself in a war she never asked for. The rain in Seattle didn't wash things clean. It just made the grime slicker. Inside the Velvet Heart, however, the weather was just a backdrop, a rhythmic drumming against the reinforced glass windows that separated the city's elite from the filth of the gutter. Eleanor adjusted her apron, the fabric biting into her waist. It was 11:45 p.m. Her feet throbbed in a way that had become a dull, permanent background noise to her life. She had been working at the steakhouse for 3 years, long enough to know that the clientele here didn't pay for the dry-aged ribeye. They paid for the silence. They paid for the darker corners. They paid so that people like Elena would fill their water glasses and then become invisible. But Elena had never been good at being invisible. She was good at pretending, which was a different skill entirely. Growing up with a father who gambled away rent money meant she learned to read a room before she even walked into it. She knew the telltale signs of a lie, the shift in posture that meant violence, and the scent of fear. Tonight, table 4 smelled like ozone and expensive leather. Julian Thorne sat with his back to the wall. That was his rule. He was a man carved out of granite, and shadows wearing a suit that cost more than Eleanor's entire existence. He was the head of the Thorne Syndicate, though the papers just called him a logistics magnate. He was handsome in a way that made your stomach drop, sharp jaw eyes the color of burnt whiskey, and a stillness that was more terrifying than shouting. Across from him sat a man Elena didn't recognize. He was younger, twitchy. He kept touching his tie. He kept glancing at the kitchen doors. Elena picked up the water pitcher, moving silently across the plush carpet. As she approached table 4, she kept her eyes lowered, but her peripheral vision was wide open. "The distribution channels are secure, Julian," the younger man said. His voice cracked slightly on the name. "We just need your signature on the transfer." Julian didn't answer immediately. He cut his steak with surgical precision. "You're sweating, Marcus. The AC is set to 68. It's just the pressure. You know how the Russians are." Elena poured the water. As the stream hit the glass, she looked into the reflection of the large, darkened window behind Marcus. The street lamp outside flickered, illuminating a black van parked illegally across the street. But it wasn't the van that made Elena's blood turn to ice. It was the reflection of the hallway leading to the restrooms behind Julian's line of sight. The kitchen door was cracked open. A man was standing there. He wasn't a chef. He was wearing a dark windbreaker, and he was screwing a suppressor onto the barrel of a pistol. Elena's hand didn't shake. If she spilled the water, she died. If she screamed, she died. The man in the kitchen was waiting for a signal. Marcus, the twitchy man at the table, checked his watch. 3 seconds. He looked at the kitchen door. 2 seconds. Elena stepped back. She walked to the POS terminal. Her mind was racing so fast, the world seemed to slow down. She printed the bill for table 4. It was a standard receipt. X ribeye. X Pinot Noir. X sparkling water. X side of truffle fries. She grabbed her pen. Her hand hovered over the paper. She couldn't write a note. Marcus would see it. It had to be subtle. It had to be something only Julian, a man who looked for patterns, would see. The disclaimer at the bottom of the bill. The standard legal text. Thank you for dining with us. We are not responsible for lost items. If a deal is unsatisfactory, please speak to management. If something has gone wrong, let us know immediately. Please locate the nearest exit in case of fire. Gunman policy applies to open carry. It was a garble of standard text, but the words were there. Elena circled them. Swift, jagged circles in blue ink. Gunman. Behind you. Deal gone wrong. Exit now. She walked back to the table. Marcus was reaching into his jacket pocket, likely for the contract or a weapon. The check, Mr. Thorne, Elena said. Her voice was steady monotone. She placed the leather folder directly in front of Julian, open with the pen resting on top of the circled words. She didn't look at him. She looked at Marcus. Can I get you a refill, sir? You look parched. It was enough of a distraction. Marcus looked up at her, annoyed. No. Leave us. In that split second, Julian looked down. Elena watched his eyes. They didn't widen. They didn't dart. They simply focused. He read the words. He processed the layout of the room in a nanosecond. He didn't look behind him. He looked at Elena. For a fraction of a second, the mask slipped. There was confusion, then calculation, then a terrifying resolve. He reached for his wallet, but his hand bypassed the inside pocket and went to his hip. Marcus, Julian said, his voice dropping an octave, sounding like grinding stones. You forgot to sign the check. What? Marcus looked down. Julian kicked the table. The heavy oak table flipped into the air as if it were made of balsa wood. In the same motion, Julian launched himself sideways, not away from the danger, but toward Elena. Thwip, thwip. 2 bullets shredded the upholstery of the booth where Julian had been sitting a microsecond ago. The sound was deceptively quiet, like a staple gun, but the destruction was violent. Wood splinters exploded into the air. Elena felt a hand of iron clamp around her wrist. She was yanked off her feet, pulled behind the overturned table, just as the 3rd shot shattered the wine glass she had been holding. Stay down, Julian roared, pulling a silver pistol from his waistband. He didn't look like a businessman anymore. He looked like a soldier. Marcus scrambled back, shouting, Do it! Do it now! The man from the kitchen burst out, firing blindly toward the overturned table. Patrons screamed. The chaotic noise of fine dining, clinking silverware laughter was replaced by the terrifying shrieks of panic. Julian popped up, fired twice, and ducked back down. 1 shot hit Marcus in the shoulder, spinning him around. The 2nd suppressed the gunman in the kitchen doorway, forcing him to take cover. The back exit, Julian commanded, looking at Elena. His eyes were intense, adrenaline dilating the pupils. Is it clear? Yes. Elena gasped, her ears ringing. Through the pantry. There's a delivery lane. Move. Now. I can't. You're a loose end now, Elena. He knew her name. He had read her name tag. They saw you pass the note. If you stay, they kill you to clear the board. Move. The reality hit her harder than a bullet. She had intervened. She wasn't an observer anymore. She was a combatant. She scrambled on her hands and knees, glass slicing into her palms. Julian moved with her, covering her body with his own as he fired another suppressive shot toward the kitchen. They burst through the swinging doors into the kitchen. The staff was frozen in terror. Out! Everybody out! Julian bellowed. They sprinted past the stoves, the heat radiating off the grills. Elena slammed her hip against the heavy steel door of the loading dock and pushed it open. The cold night air hit them like a physical blow. The rain was torrential now. "My car!" Julian shouted, pointing to a sleek black sedan parked in the alleyway. "Get in!" "I'm not getting in a car with a Mafia boss," Elena yelled, backing away. The adrenaline was making her irrational. "I just wanted to stop a murder. I didn't want to join the club." Julian grabbed her arm. He didn't hurt her, but he didn't let go. He looked at the alley entrance. Tires were screeching. The van from across the street was coming around. "You see those headlights?" Julian hissed, rain plastering his dark hair to his forehead. "That's the cleanup crew. You saved my life inside. If you stay here, they will peel your skin off to find out what you know. Get in the car." A submachine gun opened fire from the end of the alley. Bullets sparked against the brick wall, inches from Elena's head. The decision was made for her. She dove into the passenger seat of the sedan. Julian vaulted over the hood, slid into the driver's side, and punched the ignition. The engine roared, a beast waking up. He threw the car into reverse, spinning the wheel with one hand while firing out the window with the other. The sedan drifted backward, clipping a dumpster before he slammed it into drive. They rocketed out of the alley, side-swiping the incoming van. Metal screamed against metal. Elena squeezed her eyes shut, gripping the dashboard until her knuckles turned white. They wove through the Seattle traffic, Julian running 2 red lights. He was constantly checking the rearview mirror. "Are they following?" Elena asked, her voice trembling. "One car, SUV, heavy armor," Julian said, his voice terrifyingly calm. He reached into the center console and pulled out a burner phone. He dialed a number and put it on speaker. "Boss," a voice answered, code black at the velvet heart. Marcus turned. "It's a coup. I'm compromised. Heading to Safe House Epsilon." "Understood. We're scrambling the boys. Are you alone?" Julian glanced at Elena. She was shivering, her waitress uniform soaked with rain and specks of blood that wasn't hers. She looked terrified, but she hadn't cried. She hadn't passed out. She had circled the words. She had saved him. "No," Julian said into the phone. "I have a civilian. The asset." "The asset," Elena whispered. "I'm a person." Julian hung up the phone and drifted around a sharp corner, finally losing the tail. He slowed the car down as they entered the industrial district, the streetlights becoming sparse. He looked over at her. The interior light of the dashboard cast his face in a ghostly blue glow. "You're not a person right now, Eleanor," he said. And for the first time there was a trace of softness in his tone, overshadowed by the grim reality. "You're the only witness to a betrayal that's going to start a war. And until this is over, you belong to me." Elena stared at him. She thought about opening the door and jumping, but she knew he was right. She had seen the gunman's face. She had seen Marcus. She had drawn the line in the sand with a ballpoint pen. "Where are we going?" she asked quietly. "Nowhere you've ever been," Julian replied. "Somewhere the devil can't find us." He reached over and locked the doors. The drive took 2 hours. They left the city limits of Seattle, far behind, trading the rhythmic thump of tires on asphalt for the crunch of gravel on a winding mountain road. The rain had turned into a thick, suffocating mist that clung to the windshield, fighting the wipers for dominance. Julian hadn't spoken since they hit the highway. He drove with a terrifying focus, his eyes scanning the mirrors every 30 seconds, his right hand never straying far from the pistol resting in the cup holder. Eleanor sat pressed against the passenger door, her arms wrapped around herself. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind a cold cold, shaking exhaustion. She watched the trees blur past tall, dark sentinels in the night. Every mile they drove was a mile further away from her tiny apartment, her cat, her bills, and her safe, predictable life. "We're here," Julian said abruptly. He turned the car off the main road onto an unmarked dirt track. A heavy steel gate, invisible until the headlights hit it, began to slide open automatically. Julian didn't press a remote. The car's transponder had signaled their arrival. The safe house wasn't a cabin. It was a fortress of glass and concrete jutting out of the cliffside like a modern sculpture dropped into the wilderness. It looked cold, expensive, and lonely. Julian drove into a subterranean garage. The moment the engine cut, the silence was deafening. "Get out," he said, opening his door. Elena fumbled with the handle. Her legs felt like jelly as she stepped onto the polished concrete floor. Julian moved around the car. He looked at her. Really looked at her for the first time since the restaurant. Under the harsh fluorescent lights of the garage, he looked dangerous. His expensive suit was ruined, stained with rain and dust. There was a smear of blood on his white collar. "Phone," he demanded, holding out his hand. "What? Give me your phone, Eleanor. Now. I need to call my... You need to stay alive." He interrupted, his voice hard. "Modern smartphones are tracking beacons. If Marcus's people have your number, they are pinging your location right now. Give it to me." Reluctantly, she pulled her cracked iPhone from her apron pocket and handed it to him. Julian didn't turn it off. He dropped it onto the concrete floor and crushed it under the heel of his dress shoe. The screen shattered with a sickening crunch. "Hey," Elena cried out. "That was... I haven't paid that off yet. I'll buy you a factory in China that makes them if we survive the week," Julian muttered. "Upstairs. Move." He led her to an elevator. They ascended in silence. When the doors opened, they stepped into a living area that was bigger than Elena's entire apartment building. Floor-to-ceiling windows looked out into the black void of the valley. The furniture was Italian leather, stark and black. There were no photos, no personal touches. It was a house where no one lived. Julian walked to a wet bar, poured a glass of amber liquid, and downed it in one swallow. Then he turned to her. The look in his eyes changed. The soldier receded, and the interrogator stepped forward. "Sit." He pointed to a solitary armchair in the center of the room. Elena sat. She felt like a child in the principal's office, if the principal was a mob boss with a gun on the table. Julian leaned against the heavy oak desk, crossing his arms. "Who is your handler?" Elena blinked. "My what? Your handler?" "Your... the person who told you to circle those words. The person who tipped you off." "No one," Elena said, her voice trembling but defiant. "I told you. I saw the reflection." Julian laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "You expect me to believe that a waitress at the Velvet Heart, a place where people usually keep their heads down to avoid eye contact, just happened to spot a suppressor in a window reflection, analyzed the tactical situation, identified the hitman's timing, and devised a covert communication method using a receipt disclaimer in under 10 seconds. He took a step closer. "That's tradecraft, Elena. That's spy shit. Who do you work for?" "The feds, the Russians, Moretti." "I work for minimum wage plus tips." Elena snapped the absurdity of the accusation, giving her a sudden burst of courage. She stood up, despite her shaking knees. "I grew up in a house where if I didn't know what mood my father was in before he opened the door, I didn't eat that night. My dad was a gambler, a liar, and a cheat. I learned to read micro-expressions before I learned to read books." I learned to notice when a man is sweating in a room set to 68 degrees. She pointed a shaking finger at him. That guy Marcus said he touched his tie 4 times in 1 minute. He checked his watch every 30 seconds. And the guy in the kitchen, he wasn't wearing a chef's coat. He was wearing a windbreaker indoors. Who does that? I saw the gun because I was looking for it. Because in my life, if you don't look for the blow, it knocks you out. Julian stared at her. The silence stretched thick and heavy. He was analyzing her, looking for the lie. He looked at her pulse point in her neck, her dilated pupils, the way her hands were clenched into fists. You have a sharp eye, he said softly, the hostility draining away, replaced by a strange curiosity. Sharper than my own head of security. Your head of security is probably dead, Elena said bluntly, or he's in on it. Julian flinched. It was a microscopic movement, a tightening of the jaw, but Eleanor saw it. You're right, he admitted. He turned away, walking to the window. Marcus couldn't have set this up alone. He's the accountant. He doesn't have the stomach for wet work. He had backing. Who is Moretti? Eleanor asked. He had mentioned the name earlier. Julian turned back. Dante Moretti. He runs the families in New York. He's been trying to push into the West Coast logistics for years. My ports, my shipping lanes. If I'm dead, the Thorn Syndicate falls into chaos, and Moretti sweeps in to restore order. He looked at Elena, and for a moment he looked incredibly tired. You just walked into the middle of a war, Eleanor. And you're the only person in this room I know isn't trying to kill me. Why? Because you circled the words, Julian said. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the crumpled, blood-stained receipt. He smoothed it out on the desk. Gunman, behind you. Deal gone wrong. Exit now. He stared at the blue ink. You could have run out the back door. You could have hid in the freezer. Instead, you warned me. You chose a side. I didn't choose a side, Elena whispered. I just chose not to let a man die while I was pouring him water. Julian looked at her, his dark eyes intense. In this world, Elena that is choosing a side. Suddenly Julian grimaced. He grabbed the edge of the desk, his knuckles turning white. His face went pale. What is it? Elena asked, stepping forward. Nothing, Julian gritted out. You're hurt. Elena saw it now. The dark stain on his suit jacket just below the shoulder was spreading. You were hit. Just a graze. Or ricochet. I'll handle it. You can't handle a gunshot wound with one hand, Elena said, her practical nature taking over. The fear was still there, but now there was a problem to solve, and Elena was good at problems. Sit down. Take off the jacket. I don't need a waitress to... Sit down, Julian. The use of his first name, spoken with command, stopped him. He looked at her, surprised. Slowly, he sat in the leather chair. Is there a first aid kit? Bathroom. Under the sink. It's a trauma kit. Elena ran to the bathroom. It wasn't a standard first aid box with band-aids. It was a military-grade field kit. Tourniquets, coagulant gauze, sutures, scalpels. She grabbed it and ran back. Jacket off, she ordered. Julian hissed in pain as he peeled the expensive fabric away. The white dress shirt underneath was soaked in red. Eleanor used a pair of trauma shears to cut the shirt open. The wound was ugly. A bullet had gouged a track through the deltoid muscle. It hadn't hit the bone or the artery, but it was deep and bleeding sluggishly. It needs stitches, Elena said, her stomach churning. She had cleaned scraped knees and cut fingers, but never raw bullet meat. Do it, Julian said through gritted teeth. He poured more whiskey, Not into a glass, but directly onto the wound. He didn't scream, but his whole body went rigid. "I need a needle," Elena said, her hands shaking as she threaded the suture. "Steady your hands, Elena," Julian said. His voice was strained but calm. He reached out with his good hand and gripped her wrist. His skin was burning hot. "Look at me." Elena looked up. His face was inches from hers. His eyes were dark pools locking onto hers, anchoring her. "You saved me in the restaurant," he whispered. "Do it again." Elena took a deep breath. She focused. She wasn't a waitress. She wasn't a victim. She was the person holding the needle. She began to stitch. The silence in the room was broken only by the storm outside and the sharp intake of Julian's breath every time the needle pierced his skin. Elena worked with a focus she didn't know she possessed. 5 stitches, neat, tight knots. She cleaned the area with antiseptic wipes and applied a sterile dressing. "Done," she whispered, dropping the bloody instruments onto a metal tray. She slumped back onto the floor, sitting on her heels, exhausted. Julian inspected the bandage. He rotated his arm, slowly testing the range of motion. He winced but nodded. "Good work. Better than some field medics I've known." He reached for the bottle of whiskey and offered it to her. "Drink." Elena shook her head. "I don't drink. Tonight you drink." She took the bottle. The amber liquid burned her throat, making her cough, but it settled the tremors in her hands. Julian stood up, buttoning a fresh shirt he had pulled from a duffel bag in the closet. He didn't button it all the way up. The bandage peeked out. He walked to a bank of monitors, hidden behind a sliding wall panel. He typed in a complex passcode. The screens flared to life. They showed security feeds from the Velvet Heart street cameras and what looked like satellite tracking data. "What are you doing?" Elena asked, standing up and walking over to him. "Assessing the damage," Julian said. "The police scanners are going crazy. 3 dead at the restaurant. They're calling it a gang dispute." 3. Elena felt sick. Marcus is dead. My shot," Julian said without emotion. "The gunman from the kitchen is dead. My shot, and one of the patrons' collateral damage from the gunman's spray." Elena closed her eyes. "Oh God. This is on them, not you," Julian said firmly. "Look here." He pointed to a grainy feed from a traffic camera near the restaurant. It showed the black van speeding away. But it also showed something else. A silver sedan following close behind, guarding the van's rear. "That silver car," Julian said, zooming in. "That's a distinct model. Aston Martin Rapide. Custom rims. So that car belongs to Elias Thorne." Elena frowned. "Thorne? A relative?" "My uncle," Julian said. His voice was like ice. "My father's brother. He's been retired in Tuscany for 5 years, supposedly." "Why would your uncle want to kill you?" "Because he never wanted to retire," Julian said, his eyes scanning the data streams. "When my father passed, the organization came to me, not him. The council thought Elias was too volatile, too old school. He wanted to run drugs. I shifted us to high-end logistics and tech smuggling. Safer, cleaner, more profitable. He hated me for it." Julian slammed his fist on the desk, making the monitors shake. "It wasn't Moretti invading. It was a civil war. Elias made a deal with Moretti. He takes me out. Moretti gets the shipping lanes and Elias gets the throne back." He turned to Elena. "We are in more trouble than I thought." "Why?" "Because Elias knows this safe house exists. He built it." As if on cue, a red light on the security console began to blink. A soft rhythmic chime echoed through the room. Proximity alert. Sector 4. Perimeter breach. Elena's heart stopped. They found us. They didn't find us, Julian said, pulling a large assault rifle from a hidden rack on the wall. He racked the charging handle, the metallic clack-clack echoing in the large room. They were already on their way before we even left the restaurant. This was the backup plan. If the hit at the restaurant failed, they knew I'd run here. He tossed a heavy Kevlar vest at Elena. Put this on. Julian, I can't shoot a gun. You don't need to shoot. You need to survive, he said. He moved to the window, peering out into the darkness. Kill the lights. Elena scrambled to the wall panel and slapped the master switch. The safe house plunged into darkness. The only light came from the lightning flashing outside, illuminating the room in strobes of blue and white. How many? Elena whispered, crouching behind the heavy oak desk. Julian checked a handheld thermal scope. 2 vehicles at the gate. 8 men. Heavy tactical gear. They aren't street thugs, Elena. These are mercenaries. Elias pays well. He looked at her. In the shadows, his face was unreadable, but his voice was urgent. Listen to me. There is a tunnel in the basement wine cellar. It leads out to the beach about half a mile north. It opens up near an old boathouse. There is a dinghy there with a motor. We're leaving. No, Julian said. You are leaving. What? I can't outrun them in the car, not on these mountain roads. They'll run us off the cliff. I have to hold them here. I have the high ground. I can buy you 20 minutes. You want me to leave you here to die? Elena asked, her voice rising. I want you to live, Julian snapped. He crouched down in front of her, grabbing her shoulders. You are innocent in this. You have a life, a cat, a future. If you stay here, you die. Elias doesn't leave witnesses. And what about you? I was born in this life. I'll die in it. No, Elena said. Julian paused. No, no, she repeated, surprised by her own stubbornness. I circled the words. I started this. I'm not leaving you to bleed out while your uncle's goons storm the castle. Besides, she swallowed hard, I don't know how to drive a boat. A flash of lightning lit up Julian's face. He looked at her with a mixture of frustration and intense admiration. You are the most stubborn woman I have ever met, he growled. I'm a waitress in a steakhouse, Julian. I deal with hungry, entitled men every day. Stubborn is a job requirement. The glass of the front window shattered. A canister sailed into the room, clattering across the floor. It hissed, spewing white smoke. Tear gas, Julian yelled. Masks under the desk. He grabbed 2 gas masks from a compartment in the desk. He shoved one over Elena's head, tightening the straps, then pulled his own on. The room began to fill with thick, choking smoke. They're coming in. Julian's voice sounded distorted through the mask. Stay low. Stay behind me. If anyone comes through that door who isn't me, you use this. He handed her a small, snub-nosed revolver. It felt heavy and cold in her hand. Point and pull, he said. Don't hesitate. Gunfire erupted from the front entrance. The heavy wooden doors splintered as bullets chewed through them. Julian popped up from behind the kitchen island, firing his rifle in controlled bursts. Brap, brap, brap. A scream from the hallway. Elena huddled under the desk, clutching the revolver. The noise was deafening. It wasn't like the movies. It was a chaotic, terrifying roar of noise and pressure. She saw a shadow move to her left, flanking Julian. A figure in black tactical gear was creeping through the smoke, bypassing Julian's cover. He raised a shotgun, aiming it at Julian's exposed back. Elena didn't think. She didn't weigh the moral consequences. She saw the geometry of the room, just like she had seen the reflection in the window. She raised the snub-nose revolver. Her hands were shaking, but at the last second, she braced her wrist on the edge of the desk. Deal gone wrong. She pulled the trigger. The gun kicked like a mule. The shot went wide, shattering a vase next to the mercenary's head. But it was enough. The mercenary flinched, turning toward her. "Julian! Left!" she screamed through her mask. Julian spun around, dropping to one knee. He saw the threat. He fired 2 shots. The mercenary dropped. Julian looked back at Elena. Even through the gas mask, she could feel his intensity. He nodded once. A salute. "Reloading!" he shouted. But then a sound cut through the gunfire. A low, rhythmic beeping coming from the ceiling vents. Julian froze. He looked up. "Ventilation override," he said, his voice dropping. "They aren't just storming. They're pumping something else in." The white smoke turned yellow. "Nerve agent?" Eleanor asked, panic rising. "Sleeping gas," Julian corrected. "Elias wants me alive. He wants to torture the access codes out of me." The gas masks were rated for tear gas, not high-grade sedatives. Julian swayed. He tried to lift his rifle, but it slipped from his fingers. "Elena," he slurred. "Tunnel. Go." He collapsed onto the floor, his heavy body hitting the wood with a thud. Elena felt her own eyelids growing heavy. The room was spinning. She tried to crawl toward Julian to drag him, but her limbs felt like they were made of lead. She saw the front doors kick open. 4 men in full hazmat suits walked in. The last thing Elena saw before the darkness took her was a man in an expensive grey suit walking casually behind the soldiers. He used a cane. He looked down at Julian, then at Elena. "Well," the man said, his voice sounding like dry leaves. "Dinner is served." Elena's head hit the floor. The world went black. Consciousness returned to Elena, not as a waking light, but as a bucket of freezing water splashed across her face. She gasped, her lungs convulsing as the shock forced the air into them. She tried to wipe the water from her eyes, but her hands didn't move. They were zip-tied behind her back, the plastic biting deep into her wrists. She was sitting in a metal chair, bolted to a concrete floor. The room smelled of rust sea salt and old blood. It was a warehouse, high ceilings, corrugated metal walls, and the distant rhythmic clang of heavy machinery. The air was damp and cold. They were near the water. The port of Tacoma, perhaps. "She's awake," a voice rasped. Elena blinked the water away. Standing in front of her was a mountain of a man, one of the mercenaries from the safe house. But she looked past him. Julian was 10 feet away. He wasn't sitting. He was suspended. His wrists were shackled to a chain hanging from a ceiling hoist, forcing him to stand on his tiptoes. His shirt, the one she had carefully stitched up, was gone. His torso was a map of violence. Bruises blossomed across his ribs, and the bandage on his shoulder was soaked through with fresh blood. "Julian," she choked out. He lifted his head. His left eye was swollen shut, and his lip was split. But the one good eye locked onto hers with a ferocity that terrified her. "Don't speak," he rasped, his voice sounding like gravel in a blender. "Don't give them anything." "Touching," a smooth voice echoed from the shadows. The man with the cane stepped into the circle of light. Elias Thorne. He was an older version of Julian, but where Julian was granite, hard and enduring, Elias was flint, sharp, brittle, and sparked with malice. He wore a pristine charcoal suit that looked out of place in the grime of the warehouse. "Welcome back to the land of the living, miss." Elias paused, waiting for a name. "Eleanor," she said. My name is Eleanor. Eleanor. Elias tasted the name. A waitress, a nobody. And yet you are the reason my nephew isn't dead in a ditch right now. You have been inconvenient. He walked over to Julian and poked the gunshot wound on his shoulder with the tip of his cane. Julian didn't make a sound, but his muscles seized sweat popping out on his forehead. "Stop it!" Elena screamed, straining against her bonds. Elias turned to her, smiling thinly. "He's tough. Always was. My brother raised him to be a machine. But every machine has an off switch, or in this case, a resetted code." Elias pulled a tablet from his jacket. "Here is the situation, Elena. Since you are now part of the family business, you should know the stakes. Julian here modernized the Thorn Syndicate. He moved all our assets, billions of dollars, in liquid capital shipping contracts and blackmail material onto a decentralized blockchain ledger. Very smart, very secure." He tapped the screen. "Too secure. It requires a biometric key, his retina, and a 24-character alphanumeric passphrase that exists only in his head. Without that phrase, the money is just ghost data. I can't access it. I can't pay my men. I can't buy my way back into power." He walked back to Julian. "I have his eye. I can take that whenever I want, literally. But the password that he has to give me." "Go to hell, Elias." Julian spat blood, flecking his uncle's suit. Elias sighed. "I thought you might say that." He snapped his fingers. The mercenary stepped forward, holding a pair of heavy industrial pliers. "We start with the fingers," Elias said casually. "Left hand first. He doesn't need that to sign checks." "No," Elena yelled. "Wait. Look at him. He's passing out. If he goes into shock, you lose the password forever." Elias held up a hand. The mercenary paused. Elias looked at Elena with interest. "She's right," Elena said, her mind racing. "She had to buy time. She had to think. You said it yourself. It's a 24-character code. If his brain swells from trauma, or if he goes into cardiac arrest, his memory centers will scramble. You torture him too hard, you wipe the hard drive." Elias tilted his head. "You seem to know a lot about trauma physiology for a waitress." "I watch a lot of medical dramas," she lied. "But it's common sense. You need him lucid." "True," Elias admitted. "But pain is a wonderful clarifier." "Not for him," Elena said, looking at Julian. "Look at his eyes. He's dissociated. He's not here. You can peel him apart and he won't talk. He's trained for this, isn't he?" Julian was staring at her, a flicker of confusion in his good eye. He realized what she was doing. She was bluffing. She was taking control of the room. "So," Elias said, stepping closer to Elena, "if physical pain won't work on the soldier, perhaps emotional pain will." He gestured to the mercenary. "Bring her here." The mercenary cut Eleanor's zip ties from the chair, hauled her up by her arm, and dragged her to the center of the room. He forced her to her knees in front of Julian. The mercenary pulled a Sig Sauer P320 from his holster and pressed the cold muzzle against Elena's temple. Elias smiled. "The code, Julian, or the waitress, the innocent woman who saved your life, becomes a wall decoration." Julian pulled against the chains, the metal groaning. "She's nothing to me. She was collateral." "Liar," Elias whispered. "I saw the way you looked at her when you were stitching yourself up on the security feed. You feel responsible for her, and that is your weakness." He nodded to the mercenary. The man cocked the hammer. Click. 10 seconds, Julian, Elias said. 1. "Don't do it, Julian," Elena shouted, looking up at him. Tears streamed down her face, but her voice was fierce. "Don't give him the code. If you give it to him, he kills us both anyway. He needs you for the money. Once he has it, we're dead." 2. Elias counted. "Shut up, Elena." Julian groaned. 3. Elena looked at the mercenary holding the gun. He was big-bored and chewing gum. He was looking at Elias, waiting for the order. He wasn't looking at her hands. Her hands were still zip-tied behind her back, but the mercenary had cut the tie, anchoring her to the chair. She had mobility. 4. Elena took a breath. She observed. The mercenary was standing with his legs wide apart, a power stance, but his weight was on his heels. The floor was wet concrete. Elias was leaning on his cane 3 feet away. 5. The first word is vengeance, Julian screamed. Elias smiled, lowering the tablet. Good. Continue. No, Elena shrieked. She didn't wait for count 6. She threw her entire body weight backward. It wasn't a fight move. It was a physics move. She slammed her bound hands into the mercenary's groin with the force of a pile driver. The man grunted, his eyes crossing. The gun wavered. Elena rolled sideways, sweeping her legs out. She caught the mercenary's ankles. Because his weight was on his heels, he tipped backward like a felled tree. His head cracked against the concrete floor with a sickening thud. The gun skittered across the floor. What? Elias started turning around. Elena was already moving. She scrambled on her knees toward the gun. She couldn't shoot it with her hands tied, but she could kick it. She kicked the pistol toward the shadows under a stack of pallets. Get her! Elias roared to the 2 other guards by the door. The cane! Julian shouted. Elena didn't question him. She rolled onto her back and kicked upward, her sneaker connecting with Elias's cane. The cane flew out of his hand. Elias, dependent on it for balance, crumbled to the ground. Cut me down! Julian roared, straining his muscles until the veins in his neck looked like ropes. Elena, the knife on the guard's belt! The guards were running toward them. 30 feet. 20 feet. Elena scrambled to the unconscious mercenary. She turned her back to him, her fingers fumbling blindly for his belt. She felt the leather sheath. She ripped the combat knife free. She spun around on her knees and sawed at the plastic zip ties on her wrists. The plastic was tough. The guards were 10 feet away. She screamed in frustration and sliced harder, the blade nicking her own skin. Snap! Her hands were free. She didn't stand up. She lunged toward Julian. She didn't have time to unlock the shackles. She jumped, slashing the knife across the rope that held the chain hoist to the wall cleat. The rope severed. Gravity took over. The chain released. Julian dropped 3 feet, landing in a crouch, the chains still attached to his wrists, but now trailing loose from the ceiling pulley. He was free from the hoist, and he was armed with 6 feet of heavy steel chain. The first guard reached him. Julian spun, whipping the chain like a medieval flail. The heavy steel links smashed into the guard's face, shattering his jaw and sending him flying backward. Julian roared, a primal sound of released rage. He ignored the pain in his shoulder. He was pure adrenaline and violence. The second guard raised his rifle. Elena, still on the ground, grabbed the fallen cane and hurled it like a javelin. It didn't do much damage, but it hit the guard in the shins, making him stumble for a fraction of a second. It was enough. Julian closed the distance, wrapped the chain around the guard's neck, and twisted. Silence fell over the warehouse, save for the heavy breathing of the 2 survivors and the groans of the men on the floor. Elias was crawling toward the exit, looking terrified. Julian walked over to him, the chains rattling on the floor. He stepped on Elias's hand. "The code," Julian whispered, looking down at his uncle. "You want the code? Julian, please. We're family." "The code," Julian said, his voice devoid of mercy, "is loyalty is the only currency." He looked at Elena. "Get the keys from his pocket. Unlock me." Elena's fingers trembled as she fished the key from Elias's pocket and unlocked Julian's shackles. As the heavy steel hit the floor, Julian swayed, his weight falling against her. "We have to go." He rasped, his skin burning with fever. "Reinforcements will be here in 5 minutes." They left Elias moaning on the floor, a failure left to explain himself to the families, and moved out into the foggy shipping yard. It was a maze of stacked containers. Elena took the lead, her eyes scanning the mist. "2 patrols," she whispered, pulling Julian behind a blue container. "We need a distraction." She spotted a forklift nearby its forks, holding a heavy pallet of oil drums high in the air. She raised the gun she'd retrieved earlier. She didn't aim at the guards. She aimed at the hydraulic hose. Bang! The hose burst. The forks dropped and the metal drums crashed to the ground with a thunderous clamor. As the guards ran toward the noise, Elena grabbed Julian. "Move!" They sprinted across the open tarmac to Terminal 4. Julian punched a code into the keypad, and the heavy door hissed open. Inside wasn't just storage. It was a high-tech command center, hidden within a shipping hangar, housing servers, weapons, and a sleek black helicopter. Julian collapsed into a chair at the main terminal. His fingers flew across the keyboard. "Initiating Protocol 0, he said grimly. "Elias thinks he can crack the ledger. But I just bankrupted the Thorn Syndicate. Every dime is being dispersed to charity accounts and ghost shells. Elias is fighting for a kingdom of ash." Outside, tires screeched. A jeep smashed through the hangar door, debris flying. Mercenaries poured out, trapping them in the glass-walled server room. Julian pulled a small velvet box from his pocket. "Take this," he said, handing it to her. "It's a micro-drive with access to my personal offshore funds. There's a dive set it by the back exit. Go." "Stop trying to save me," Elena yelled, grabbing an assault rifle from the rack. "We go together, or we die together. I am tired of men telling me when to leave the table." Julian looked at her, bloodied, terrified, but standing her ground. She wasn't a waitress anymore. She was a partner. "Okay," he said. He tapped a final command. "Automated defense system active." The ceiling opened, and automated turrets dropped down, raining rubber bullets and tear gas on the attackers. In the chaos, Julian pointed to a heavy armored truck. "The Rhino, get in." Elena jumped into the driver's seat and slammed the start button. The V8 engine roared. They smashed through the back wall of corrugated metal, landing on the loading dock. The truck fish-tailed on the wet wood as Elena floored it toward the main gate. "It's closed!" she screamed. "Ram it!" She gritted her teeth and accelerated. The heavy truck smashed through the chain link and steel gate, exploding onto the main road. Elena drove like a demon, weaving through traffic, until she finally pulled onto a quiet forest road miles away. Silence rushed back in. Julian leaned his head back, pale and exhausted. "We made it," he whispered. He reached over, covering her trembling hand on the steering wheel. "But I have nothing left, Elena. No empire. No army." Elena looked at their joined hands. "I expect a raise. And better tips." Julian smiled weakly, his eyes closing. "Deal." Elena looked at the sunrise bleeding over the mountains. She put the truck in gear. She knew a place where they could hide a cabin off the grid. The waitress was gone. The survivor was driving. The cabin was exactly as Elena remembered it, a forgotten shack perched on the edge of the Olympic Peninsula, smelling of pine needles and damp wood. Getting Julian inside had been a nightmare, but for 3 days the world outside ceased to exist. There was only the rain, the wood stove, and the man burning with fever on the dusty mattress. Elena became a nurse again, using expired aspirin and tearing up her apron for bandages. She didn't sleep. She sat by the window with the Sig Sauer in her lap, watching the driveway. On the morning of the 4th day, the fever broke. Elena was stirring a pot of beans when a weak voice croaked from the bedroom. "It smells like a campfire." She rushed to the doorway. Julian was propped up, pale but lucid. His whiskey-colored eyes were sharp again. "You stayed," he whispered, looking at the dark circles under her eyes. "I'm stubborn." Elena shrugged, masking her relief. "And I'm protecting my investment. You owe me a raise." Julian managed a weak laugh. "Sit down, Elena." He told her the news. While he slept, the world had changed. "Protocol 0 worked," he said. "I checked the burner phone. The Thorn Syndicate is in chaos. Elias's accounts were wiped and donated to 1,000 different charities. The feds raided his compound yesterday. He's finished." "So we won. The war is over." Julian nodded. "But so is the Empire. I'm legally dead, Elena. I have no army, no territory. Just a micro-drive with enough funds to start over, but not enough to rule a city." He reached out, covering her hand with his. "I have nothing to offer you but me." "I don't want a city," Elena said firmly. "I spent my life serving men who thought they owned the world. I don't want an emperor, Julian. I want a partner." She squeezed his hand. "You said loyalty is the only currency. I'm rich in that. Are you?" Julian pulled her closer, his eyes fierce. "Elena, I would burn the world down again just to sit in this shack with you." He kissed her, then not like a boss claiming a prize, but like a drowning man finding air. It tasted of wood smoke and survival. For the first time, Elena wasn't serving anyone. She was exactly where she chose to be. 6 months later. The sun over the Amalfi coast was gold, warming the stone terrace of Il Rifugio. The restaurant was the talk of Italy, exclusive, discreet, and perfect. Elena walked through the dining room in a simple white dress, checking the flowers on table 3. She didn't wear an apron anymore. She walked straight to the back office. Julian sat at an olive wood desk, reviewing a digital ledger. He looked healthy, the tan hiding the scar on his shoulder. "The shipment from Marseille is late," he noted. "It's not late," Elena said, leaning against the door frame. "I rerouted it through a private marina in Capri. The port inspector in Naples was getting curious." Julian looked up, grinning. "You have a terrifying instinct for smuggling my love." "It's just logistics," she smiled. "Like seating a party of 12 without a reservation. You move the pieces until they fit." Julian stood up and wrapped his arms around her waist. "We have the Minister of Finance coming in tonight. He wants to discuss import taxes." "I'll handle him," Elena said. "I know how to charm men who think they're important." "I know." Julian kissed her forehead. "Are you happy, Elena? It's a quiet life compared to the steakhouse." "It's not that quiet," she whispered, looking out at the sparkling Tyrrhenian Sea. They were safe, wealthy, and answered to no one. "Wait," Julian said. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small framed object. It was a wrinkled receipt, stained with a single drop of dried blood. "Gunman. Behind you." Deal gone wrong. Exit now. He placed it on the desk. I framed it, to remind me that the best deal I ever made cost me exactly $68 and a generous tip. Elena smiled a look that lit up the room. She picked up a pen and wrote on the glass of the frame. She circled the word exit, drew an arrow pointing to Julian, and wrote, "Never." She kissed him and turned to the door. "Get back to work, boss." "Yes, ma'am," the former Mafia Don replied. Elena walked out onto the terrace. She took a deep breath of the lemon-scented air. She wasn't just a survivor anymore. She was the one writing the menu. And that is the story of Eleanor and Julian. It started with a split-second decision, a waitress noticing a detail that everyone else missed, and ended with a partnership that toppled an empire. It reminds us that sometimes the most dangerous weapon isn't a gun. It's awareness. It's the ability to see the world not for what it pretends to be, but for what it actually is. Elena could have stayed in the shadows. She could have let the hit happen and gone home to her cat. But she chose to act. She chose to circle the words. And in doing so, she didn't just save a life. She claimed her own. What would you have done if you were in Eleanor's shoes? Would you have risked your life to pass that note? Or would you have run out the back door? Let me know in the comments below. I really want to read your theories. If you enjoyed this twisty mafia romance and want to hear more stories about ordinary people finding themselves in extraordinary danger, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. Don't forget to subscribe and ring the notification bell so you never miss a new story. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.